So Mr. Pillay has asked two questions. One about inequality and the other about empathy. I think it goes back to the point that Mr. Singh referred to as optics as well. It's tied to that. With your leave, sir, I would like to take some time in answering this question because this is quite important.
Yes.
So I seek your indulgence.
Yes. We can go past 5:30 if needed. Not for your response. I mean for the for this debate. These clarifications rather. There's no debate. Please proceed, Minister.
It might take a fair bit of time, but anyway. So, I mean, I understand the question. It's many Singaporeans face challenges in today's economic climate, rising prices for many things, high inflation. So inequality is one of the biggest issues we are grappling with, not just here in Singapore, but the world over. And how we deal with it and the values that inform our approach are important. I often speak about inequality when I speak outside to audiences because it is a critical issue for Singapore and also because it is seared into me because I've gone through it myself, seen it firsthand. So it's not just an academic exercise for me. I grew up in rental housing. I stayed in Bukit Swee as a young boy. Then as a teenager, I lived in a 3-room flat in Block 3, Ghim Moh. I still remember the address. About 20 years later, as a senior counsel, I owned a GCB in Astrid Hill. And prior to that, I owned a house in Wee Tiong Hiam Park, also very nearby, though I never lived in that house. The distance between Block 3, Ghim Moh and Astrid is only about 1 kilometer. It's a short walking distance. But the psychological and financial distance between Ghim Moh and Astrid or Wee Tiong Hiam is oceans wide. As an undergraduate, when I lived in Ghim Moh, I used to cross the old Bukit Timah railway line, walk up East Sussex Lane to the bus stop along Holland Road to take a bus to law school. 20 years later, I would drive along Holland Road. At the same bus stop, instead of walking up the left, I make a right turn into Coronation Road West to go into Queen Astrid Park, to go to my house there. I think a lot about inequality and the gap, not least because I have straddled the gap and have lived at both extremes, rental and GCB. So for my part, the circumstances I grew up with are seared into me. And when you have gone through the experiences I have, you never forget them, regardless of how successful you become. So how should you deal with inequality? You don't deal with inequality by preventing poor kids from doing well. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew set up a system that allowed a poor Indian kid to become a successful lawyer, to do well. You tackle inequality by providing for social mobility, by helping people to move up. You do this, for example, by providing good support, opportunities, help everyone to move up, and redistributing income from those who have succeeded to the poor or less well off through taxes. You can tax the rich more and redistribute while making sure to keep the system fair. If you tax too much, the wealthy will leave. If you don't tax enough, it won't be a fair system. So you have to get it just right. And in Singapore, the top 10% of personal income taxpayers account for, I believe, 80% of our total income tax revenue, personal income tax revenue. And those at the lower 20% receive about $4 in benefits for every tax dollar they pay. So in Singapore, those who are wealthier must understand Singapore is a small place. We sink or swim together. And they need to contribute, pay more taxes, We have to make sure that those who are less well off are properly taken care of, and there is social mobility and opportunity. Personally, based just on the 2-3 years income between 2005 and 2007, before I became a minister, I probably paid more than $2 million in taxes, and rightfully so. A famous American jurist, Oliver Wendell Holmes, once said, "Taxes are the price we pay for civilization." In my case, all I have, I got from Singapore. It's only right for me to give back. Dealing with inequality is always a work in progress, and how can we continue to find ways to bring about greater equality? We must encourage those who have more, who have achieved more, to come forward and contribute their time and talent and resources to help make a stronger society. We need people to step forward, help fellow Singaporeans, including in public service. So if you look at Mr. Lee's approach, since the start, he brought in people who are doing well outside and those who had the heart to serve. Some were independently very wealthy, but he persuaded them to give up their careers in the private sector to come in to serve Singapore. They, together with Mr. Lee, equal society. Of course, if there are other good workable suggestions on how we can do better, that will be good. But we shouldn't penalize people who do well. And sir, on Mr. Pillay's second question on empathy, if you live in such a place, how can you have empathy? I just spoke about Mr. Lee's approach. Whether you should serve or not should depend on your heart. Do you want to help serve, make lives of Singaporeans better? Mr. Lee brought in people as ministers and MPs regardless of their background, and didn't matter if they were rich or poor, from trade unionists like Mr. Mahmud Awang, from the Singapore Traction Company Employees Union, Mr. Ho Si Beng from Printers Union, to highly successful businessmen and professionals like Mr. Lim Kim San and Mr. Eddie Barker. For example, Mr. Lim Kim San. He was a shrewd, successful businessman when Mr. Lee brought him into public service. Mr. Lee said he helped change the fortunes of Singapore as HDB chairman. He then served as minister in various ministries, including finance, defense, national development, where he was also responsible for building HDB flats. He lived in a very large bungalow in Dalvey Road. Staying there and his wealth didn't prevent him from feeling the plight of Singaporeans who had no homes to live in, and doing his utmost to solve their problems by building HDB homes for them. Others too. Mr. Barker is the minister who drafted the separation agreement. He stayed in Queen Astrid Park. Should Mr. Lee have said to him, "Eddie, you are a successful lawyer living in Queen Astrid Park, you can't serve Singapore"? Dr. Goh Keng Swee stayed in a very large black and white bungalow at Goodwood Hill. He was DPM, key architect of modern Singapore, economy, defense, education, across the board. Mr. Hon Sui Sen, he served as finance minister, chairman EDB, president of DBS. He also rented a black and white at Malcolm Road. Or I should add, at that time, it was among the benefits that senior officials could rent houses reserved for them. When we moved to a clean wage policy, these black and whites and other state-owned properties were made available to anyone, and the rentals were determined by the market. But they remain the same type of black and white houses that Minister Vivian and I are staying in. Not any more prestigious or less prestigious then or now, and some, of course, quite run down as compared to modern GCBs. So it becomes a matter of personal preference. And I should add, I'm not in any way seeking to compare myself or other current ministers with the ministers I have mentioned. Point I'm making is a person's ability to serve should not depend on where he lives or how poor or rich he is. And what about myself? I don't believe the homes I lived in have affected my ability to serve and empathize. I was doing well in my career as a lawyer while I was serving as a backbench MP for more than 20 years before I became a minister. As I explained, this was how I was able to buy my family home and pay the rental for Ridout. I became an MP in September 1988 when I was 29. At that time, I was a few months away from becoming a partner. I knew it would be very challenging to manage my career and be an MP at the same time. But I agreed to stand for elections in 1988, become an MP, and do what I can to make Singapore a better place. Every hardworking MP will know the requirements of being an MP in terms of time, energy, are considerable. From the beginning of my journey as an MP, I found it demanding, but I also found it inspiring. Demanding because my legal career required my full attention, but it was inspiring because I was doing what I could to forge a community in Chongpang. I enjoyed interacting with my residents. I drew meaning and purpose from serving my residents. When I came into politics in 1988, most Chongpang residents were generally less well off. Many were like my parents who had to work tirelessly to provide the best for their children. They are good, hardworking people. They want a better life. They want their children to do better. And I want to be there to help them to do so. So although it was challenging to juggle between being an MP and my legal career, I carried on. Then in 2008, I was asked by Prime Minister to become a minister because Prof. Jayakumar, who had been law minister for 20 years by then, was stepping down. I was 48 at the peak of my career. It would have been much easier for me to continue being a full-time lawyer than to join cabinet. I did also seriously think about the cutback in income. It was going to be very significant. I had to assess what it would mean for me, my family, and assess that against what I could contribute by serving Singaporeans as a minister. I asked myself on my last day on earth, this is a question I ask frequently. When I reflect back on my life, what would I have wanted to have done with my life? Spend all my time making more money, or also spend some time doing some good work for the community and others, and perhaps some good for the country. Many things that people spend time on will not seem worthwhile to have done in the rearview mirror when your life is about to end. So having twice or three times more money would not make me twice or three times more happy or fulfilled. So I accepted PM's invitation, agreed to enter full-time politics as a minister. It was and continues to be an honor and a privilege to serve Singaporeans and Singapore. As I said, all I have, I got from Singapore. It was Singapore's system, the system that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and Dr. Goh Keng Swee and their team set up to provide stability, good standards of living, good schools and opportunities that allowed me and so many others to achieve what we have, despite where we started, and in spite of race, language, or religion. So I was fortunate to have been born in Singapore, and I want to help make policies to make sure other Singaporeans have the opportunities that I did. Please don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting that I made a special sacrifice in taking a pay cut or moving from my family home. It wasn't a sacrifice. It is a privilege to serve Singapore, Singaporeans. I've done this now for 35 years, 20 years as a backbencher and 15 as a minister. I've spent more than half my life in Parliament and more than half my life with Chongpang. I do not hide what I earned as a lawyer. It's public knowledge. My residents judge me by my heart and my commitment to serve, not by how much I earn and where I live. They know I am there for them, that I'm there to help. I've lived in a HDB flat, rental flat, 3-room flat, 5-room flat, condominium, semi-detached, bungalows, GCBs. Before I moved to Ridout, my empathy did not increasingly decrease as my houses got larger or as I made more money. Over the years, and no one raised any issue of my empathy or my ability to serve, in the 10 years I was living in my GCB in Astrid Hill. Is the empathy affected? Does it get more affected when you move from a GCB that you own to a black and white that you rent? Is that the way we are going to judge politicians? I hope members will seek to make Singaporeans and everyone understand what is involved, because we shouldn't start judging people on the basis of where they live or how successful they were in their private sector, and then say, you're too successful, you cannot come in to serve. I think that will be a wrong principle. And it's contrary to everything that made Singapore successful in the first generation. So over the years, I have seen generations of Chongpong residents. Some have moved out into bigger residences, some have received scholarships to study overseas, some have moved back to stay in new developments in Nee Soon, so that they could be near to take care of their aging parents. These are gratifying reminders that our system works well. We have good social infrastructure to uplift those who can excel, support the vulnerable, make every town a caring and livable home. It has been a deeply fulfilling journey for me these 35 years. The heart is the same, the commitment is the same from the time when I started when I was 29. And I don't think where I stay or have stayed has affected whether I've been able to serve. And now I've chosen to live in a bungalow in Ridout. As I said, the money that I made in my previous job as a lawyer is essentially paying for the rental. And it doesn't change my empathy any bit from when I was living in the GCB or the previous houses. So in summary, in answer to the clarification question, I was doing well in my profession. I was asked to come forward and serve. I could have said no and carried on with my legal career. But I felt that if the Prime Minister wanted me on his team, I had something to contribute. I could make a bigger contribution to Singapore in that way. So I did. It is for others to decide if I have measured up as a minister. But in good conscience, I can say I have put my heart and soul into it and carried out my duties to the best of my ability. Thank you, sir.